moving into a section which is more about women's representation internationally in sport. I'm told that Sally is someone who rarely speaks. I mean, on these big platforms, I don't believe that really. And looking at your career, but I think what that meant was that we're really, really delighted that you've agreed to speak today. And we really want to hear from your exceptional experience championing the cause of women in sport. What you have to say about what next and where we should go. So over to you, Sally. Everyone's seen your potted CV. It would be a waste of time for me to read it out, but it's very, very impressive.
So can I just check you can hear me and can see me?
Yeah, we can see you and hear you. All good.
Excellent. That's a good start then. The technology is working. Well, I mean, what a slot to be given. I'm slotted between two incredibly impressive women. Following Tanny is not something that I've ever had to do before, and it is a privilege. And coming before Anita and her background and what she's done for women's sport internationally, well, what a complete privilege. And thank you so much for asking me to speak today. I've been really looking forward to it, and I hope I can add something to the conversation this afternoon. Now, I've been chief exec at UK Sport for the sum total of 10 months. I've almost spent more time working from home than I have in the office, like probably some of you over the last period. And I've been asked to talk this afternoon about the work that we do at UK Sport around the international arena in relation to promoting women. And as an organisation, we're very well known for what we do in terms of supporting sports in the Olympic and the Paralympic space. We're also well known for what we do in terms of bringing major events to this country. But probably an area of work that we're less well known for, but that we're incredibly proud of, is the work that we do in the international space, both in terms of international influencing and international development. And I'm joined on the conference by a couple of my colleagues who do huge amounts of work in this space, Rob Marini and Claire Barrell. And I feel slightly fraudulent being here to sort of 10 months and speaking about the work that these guys have been doing for years and years. But I feel also very proud to do that and speak on behalf of our organisation about the work that we've done in this space. And partly because in my previous role as CEO at England Hockey, I was involved in both international development and international influencing work with UK Sport. And I will touch on that a little bit. But just a little bit about my experience in hockey, just to start the conversation off. Hockey was a sport that I played, I team managed, I got into administration, and it was always a sport that I just saw as 50-50, male and female. It was 50-50 almost participation, 50-50 in the way that we invested in the men's and the women's game. The International Federation had a really good history, recent history over the last sort of decade or so, of women on their board. We had a female president of the International Federation board for quite a long period. And I think probably very much took for granted just how gender equal it was. But I was reminded when thinking about preparing for this presentation about actually some of the experiences that I had that were less gender neutral. And I'll share with you a real example. Inside the sport, it always felt just equal men and women. But the number of times in my career, in the 10 years that I spent as CEO of hockey, where I was introduced to people outside of the sport, or even outside of sport completely, but outside of hockey, where I was introduced as Sally, she's the CEO of hockey. And the number of times that people said to me, oh, wow, that's interesting, women's hockey. Well, I'm willing to bet that if I was a man, that if they'd been introduced as the CEO of hockey, I'm not sure how many times people would have said, oh, that's interesting, men's hockey. And actually, when those occasions happened, it was a real reminder to me of just how gender equal hockey really was and is. But interestingly, the statistics on the international situation in relation to women in senior international leadership positions in sports administration, well, they just really speak for themselves. A study that was conducted for us at UK Sport in 2018 showed that out of 71 international federations and supranational sports bodies, at board level, male numbers outnumbered female 78% to 22%, with several as still a really long way off from any female representation at all. And a 2020 review of the 31 international federations that sit under the umbrella of ASWAF, the Association of Summer Olympic Sports, revealed that only one had an executive board with more than 40% women, whilst 8 out of 31, so 25%, still had less than 15% women on their board. That's 25% still had less than 15% on their board. Now, of course, one way of increasing representation of women, which has already been mentioned today earlier on, was around the idea of introducing quotas, and in the international arena about establishing women's committees as a means to show that an international federation is taking this seriously. Now, there's a debate to be had about the pros and cons of quotas, and these actions do definitely have a role, but they don't always bring around the change that's needed, and they continue to mean that women are an exception or need a special mechanism for inclusion or perceived equality, and that they're just not part of the very fabric of sport and how it's governed. And that's what needs to be different. And I think it's really important that all leaders in international sports bodies not only embrace the agenda, many do, at least nominally, but that they need to look within. They need to champion and actively implement changes in the way that they recruit, in the way they support and encourage women to apply for and achieve these roles in the leadership space. Now, the International Olympic Committee, which I'm sure Anita will talk about, their commitment to lead from the top is underpinned by a series, 25 gender equality recommendations that has set a roadmap for change. And it's clear that that's going to require really collective effort. And it shouldn't be something that's just left to us as females to do. Men also need to be part of making that change happen. And of course, it's not just down to the international bodies to lead change. They are membership organisations, and they rely very, very heavily on the national federations, our NGBs and NGBs across the world, to support, promote and enable women to get into pathways to leadership roles. And they need to then support the NGBs, need to support subsequent opportunities and exposure for women into international pathways. But we know from the experience that we've got at UK Sport, and many of you will know from your own personal experience, that it's hard and it takes time. And in fact, it can take several decades to establish yourself domestically, let alone internationally. But this is where we all have a responsibility to review our internal systems and cultures, as well as do far more than we currently do to nurture talent and relations and opportunities for women to come through. And it's an area that we're at UK Sport, through our international relations investment into NGBs, we've attempted to shape this and make progress on. So during the Tokyo cycle, for example, we implemented a system where we encouraged NGBs to nominate one male and one female as pathway candidates for upcoming international positions. And we have seen a shift in the number of women coming forward, but it's still not enough, and it will be a priority for us moving forwards as we shape our investment approach for future Olympic and Paralympic cycles. It's also worth me talking a little bit, for those of you that are unfamiliar, with the International Leadership Programme that we run at UK Sport. This has been running for quite a long time. We've had 10 cohorts over the years, and it's about preparing and upskilling individuals from UK governing bodies to be able to operate effectively in the international sporting arena. And out of 127 participants we've had over those 10 cohorts, we've had 77 males and 50 females. What's brilliant is that this year's cohort is the most diverse from a gender point of view to date, with more women than men for the first time ever. But again, we recognise that there is still more that we need to do. Other stuff that we do at UK Sport, we engage extensively through our international relations network. There are more than 200 British people who hold international positions, and part of that, we are talking to them about trying to influence increasing female representation in international sport. And in addition to that, and the support that we give to those individuals and the investment that we make, we also do other things like nurturing knowledge exchanges country to country. And this is a change that demands cross-border cooperation and influence from the top down and the bottom up. And an example of a piece of work we're doing around that is working in collaboration with the French Ministry of Sport in the build-up to Paris 2024 Olympic and Paralympic Games. We also engage and support international networks such as the International Working Group on Women in Sport, which obviously looks at breaking down the barriers for women and girls in sport. We've heard about that again today. And Ricky, if you could just share the slide. I've only got one slide to share with you. I don't know if you guys can see that. I hope you can. But one of the other things that we do is that we actively support initiatives not only in the leadership space, but also activities that grow women and girls' participation in sport at an international level. So some of you may be familiar with UK Sport's International Partnership Programme, whereby we work with the British NGBs, and we work with them to partner with national federations overseas, so their equivalents overseas, and also the international federations to deliver collaborative development projects. And between 2017 and 2020, UK Sport and our partners have worked in 33 countries. The map gives you a pretty good illustration of just how global this is, but with 15 international federations and 15 NGBs. And projects are focused on growing and managing women's game in those countries, or increasing the number of women in a sport, and all sorts of projects, from rowing in South Africa and the Caribbean, to taekwondo in South Asia, to netball in Zambia and Argentina, to athletics that has gone on in 10 countries worldwide. And the map really shows, as I said, the global reach of that work. And I was really fortunate enough to be the instigator of a project that we did at hockey, where we instigated a project in partnership with UK Sport when I was there, and the International Federation as part of the TAP project. And it was a development program between England Hockey, African Hockey, Ghana Hockey, and the International Federation. And it was linked to England Hockey's bid to host the Women's World Cup that was hosted in 2018 back in London. And it involved an exchange program between England Hockey and Ghana Hockey for 4 years, about developing their coaches, their leaders, and very specifically about developing their international women's hockey team, with the ambition that the hockey team would qualify for the 2022 Commonwealth Games. Well, unbelievably, the project was so successful, they actually ended up qualifying for the 2018 Commonwealth Games in Australia. And the only disappointment was that we didn't actually end up with England being able to play Ghana, because the countries got drawn in two different groups. But it would have been a fitting culmination of that project. And having had the opportunity to go to Ghana and see firsthand the impact of that project on the women, that both on the field, the players, but also the women who were involved in administration and coaching and officiating, that experience will stay with me for a long time. It's something I'm incredibly proud of, and was really proud to be part of, where it was really genuinely making a difference to Ghanaian women, and specifically to their role in leadership positions, but also as athletes really getting the same opportunity that their male counterparts got. So where do we go next? Well, in the UK, we're making progress domestically in increasing female representation on sports bodies. You'll be aware probably that recently ourselves and Sport England have said that we're going to review the Code for Sports Governance. And within that, when it was launched a few years ago, it had a 30% gender diversity target. Well, this has had a real impact on the number of women on boards, and it's now standing at 40%. We're going to use the current review of the code to look at the whole of the Code of Governance, but we also know specifically within that there is a long way to go in terms of driving other areas of diversity into our domestic system, and we're very, very committed to doing that. And we recognise that we haven't got it all right here in the UK, not just in terms of sports leadership with women, but also areas such as coaching, where we're really behind the curve. If you look at performance coaching internationally, there is such a long way to go. And we want to see more women in senior international coaching roles, umpiring, leading, administrators. And we at UK Sport will continue to seek partners and opportunities that allow us to influence through the strength of our networks. And as we've heard very recently, you know, in terms of the responsibility around that with the Black Lives Matters movement, if we're not going to do this now, if not now, then when? And if it's not us, then who? And I want to conclude by just acknowledging the commitment from several UK stakeholders behind this bid to host the Secretariat for the International Women's Working Group on, the International Working Group on Women, and becoming the Secretariat from 2022 to 2026. I'm excited that we're going to bid to host this. I really believe that the UK has actually a really distinct and important contribution to play in hosting the Secretariat. And I think that doing so will provide a really major opportunity for us to build on the domestic and international momentum that we've got around diversity representation in sport. And I think it can drive transformative action for us and for the UK in our sort of global leadership space. And what I really hope it will do is shift the dial on the conversation being by women, for women. And I'll just finish by saying that having been in post 10 months here at UK Sport, I take our role as a leadership body in British sport very, very seriously. And what comes with leadership responsibility is the need for us to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. And I am genuinely really proud that women are excelling in our organisation. I took over from a woman, Liz Nichol, had an excellent career as chief exec at UK Sport. We have a female chair as well. Of our independent directors, we have a 50-50 split. And in the exec team of 7, we have 4 females. And we have females in managerial positions all over the organisation. I recognise that we've got very big steps to take in other areas of diversity, and we've got to walk the walk there as well, not least in disability and in Black, Asian and ethnic people coming through to sit on our boards and be part of our managerial team. But I will conclude there and just say again, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. Thank you for giving me this challenging slot to follow Tanny and come before Anita. But I'm looking forward to the panel and I'm looking forward to hearing Anita speak.
Brilliant. Sally, thank you so much. And yeah, it's such an incredible lineup that you have certainly held your own. That was brilliant, really interesting. Now I'm sort of hoping Anita is warming up because I think it's pretty early in the morning where you are. Philadelphia, is it? And we're just so delighted that that you're up and engaging with us for this. I think a number of people who've spoken today, if not all of them probably, have to an extent been what I call sort of the first women to, and therefore their own role models. And this must certainly be true for you, Anita, as such a trailblazer. And from what I've seen and heard from you before, sticking as authentically to who you are as anyone we've heard from today, clear about what's right, not confused by what's happened in the past and what other people might consider to be normal. So we're really, really delighted you could join us from the International Olympic family. And I hope you're there, Anita. Please tell me you are.
I am here in the City of Angels.
That's wonderful. Thank you for joining us. We're really looking forward to hearing your perspective on all these issues.
Thank you. Shall I start?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, all right. Thank you for inviting me to take part in this. I got on the line and saw the video as well, which is very, very wonderful. What I want to talk to you about is 2 things, strategy and use of language, which is really important. My mom taught us that we are one race, the human race. I added, and we're all the same, and yet each of us is unique. Even identical twins are not identical, so we're each unique. So with that, as I started my life in the sports world, I came to realize that access to sport is a birthright. It's solely human to take part in sport. Other animals take part in play and kids take part in play, but sport is when you accept a set of rules and agree to play by those rules. So that's that's human. No one else sets up hurdles and races across them to see who can get there first or records that. I like to say I've seen ants get on a twig to get across a body of water, a puddle. I've never seen them line up and race against each other. So we enjoy, as humans, we enjoy sport. And since we're all human, why didn't we have the number of women represented in sport that we have in our population at large? So my idea was that when I was given the responsibility to do something about this, I thought, okay, what is it that people say about women? Well, they don't know anything about sport. And I thought, okay, we can solve that. We need to have more women Olympians, because you can't tell an Olympian or a Paralympian that they don't know anything about sport. So the strategy was to make sure that every federation had women's events and increasing numbers of women in those events. And with that, we had a greater pool. And I'm proud to say that the number of women who competed at the Olympic Games, both winter and summer, from 1900 to 1984 was around maybe 13,000. And the number from 88 to now, well, till next year, I guess, would be more than 30, I think 35,000. So we've had a great increase of women who know something about sport, who would be available to be picked up by their federations. This is to say there's absolutely no excuse for the federations not to have more women on their governing boards. There's just no excuse at all, because there are plenty of people out there, women who may not be Olympians or Paralympians, but women who have helped a lot. We learned, the IOC learned a lot from our studies in cooperation with Loughborough University. And I think we did 3 in totality, which helped us understand the National Olympic Committees and how women were involved with that, helped us understand more about how women felt about taking part in sport and in sport governance. And so those, I think I hope they're still available on the IOC website, because they're excellent studies. So my goal was that my responsibility was to have more women involved in sports. And so also we had to do the right thing. We needed to be, what's the right word here? Well, we needed to have women involved. So I started saying that the only way for sport to have more people in it was to use the huge number of women who've not been involved. And so basically logic. And I used to report at each executive IOC session. One president called me my report naming and shaming, which is exactly what I wanted to do, because if you're shamed out loud, then people will be looking at you to know what you've done to fix it. And there's so many ways to fix it. It's just nonsense. I loved it when people would say to me, oh, I'm sorry, but we have no women. I said, gosh, so what's your total population? And what portion of that population is so there are no women at all? Yeah, so the easy answer is I just had to push away. One of my favorite ones was, as I made a report, one of my colleagues raised his hand and said, Anita, you have to be patient. And I was able to say, well, we've been patient since 779. I think time's up. We need to have an even playing field and be respected. The other thing that's important about this, and you were talking about media coverage, oddly enough today, the media coverage at the Olympic Games is absolutely proportionate to the number of women on a team. And likewise, in the Paralympic Games, there's not as much media yet, but it's odd that this can be done for 2 weeks and 10 days, but after those 2 weeks or 10 days are over, can't do it anymore, can't cover women's sports. And I find that really strange. And that's something that I hope that we can help solve, because every day women are active in sport. I mean, it's a little more challenging today as at least we here are view us as persona non grata and can't be traveling any place. with COVID. But having the Olympic Games has really made a difference for the publicity of women's sports. We also intend to be 50-50 on the field of play. We would have been there in Tokyo, but for baseball, the teams have, I don't know, I think 21 or 22 players. And for softball, they're, I think it's 9 or 11. So the baseball teams blew out the numbers for men. I suggested that there be 12 softball teams, which would equalize the numbers, but that didn't go very far. The other thing I wanted to be specifically talk to you about is critical thinking and the use of language. Earlier, there was talk about publicity and how women are described. I hope those days are gone. And we need to be vigilant. When we see something happening, we need to talk about it. We need to go to whoever has promoted that bit and say that's not acceptable anymore. The IOC has guidelines for reporting. And by the way, all of the IOC stuff you can look at, if you have patience, on our website, which is simply olympic.org. So there's a whole lot of information on the website. Now I've lost my strategy on how to share this with you. But your titles of Imagine, Believe, and Succeed are very important. You have to have a notion of what you want. So that's your goal. Then you have to have a strategy. How are you going to get it? So my strategy was to have more women Olympians, and therefore more women could be involved in governance. And finally, there'd be possibly more women IOC members. I'm so proud to say I was the 5th woman elected to serve on the IOC. And today we have 39 women serving on the IOC. So we're not quite at 50-50, but we're going to get there for sure. Now back to the part about, one other thing, safe sport. I am horrified by what happened to the gymnast. I'm horrified that nobody really talked. Of course, after they asked their parents to stand up for them and their parents said, no, this is fine. What could they do, really, the athletes? What could they do? But we were in the USOPC, we were setting up a safe sports organization, but we couldn't get anyone else to join us in funding it. And we figured that it would be somewhat suspicious if the USOPC were the only funders of this. And sadly, that's still where we are. But if we'd started that year, even though we didn't have funding from anyone else, something would have been different. And there is a documentary on now called Athlete A. And if you happen to see it, I hope you'll note that the word Olympic is used only once in the whole documentary, because most of the harm was done within the Gymnastics Federation. So you can look at our safe sport and see what sports are not doing well or are doing well. It's something that I hope every NOC will have, because coaches, so often predators, know when they're about to get caught. And they find another place to go where they can continue their dastardly deeds. So we need to keep track of those predators and make sure that they don't go from country to country or sport to sport. Now, back to language. We are so brainwashed by language. What we hear on the radio about women, what we see on television, for example, and this back to my work for 20 years as the president of the LA 84 Foundation. We undertook several studies there. And we found out that the way we took the US Open tennis match and the 2 basketball championships, the collegiate basketball championships, we took a look at them. And it was so interesting that if it were tennis, you'd watch a match. Well, they competed really well. And if you listen to the commentator in the women's matches, oh, that was a really bad mistake. Oh, she shouldn't have done that. And, oh, she must be getting tired, blah, blah, blah. And if you just watched the event, you'd find it was a very highly skilled event. But if you listen to the commentators, you think, oh, that was terrible. Then you listen to the men's game, and it's like, oh, that was just luck. He'll fix that next time. And did you see the strength and the ability that he evidenced? But the same thing might have happened on the women's side, but on the women's side, it's, well, that was a little faulty. So we're being brainwashed by the people who have the microphone or the camera. In basketball, we learned that because everybody's saying, oh, the women's game's boring, they can't dunk and so forth. Well, the beginning of the men's event, there were trumpets blowing, and they were showing the athletes from the bottom up, so they looked gigantic. This, of course, is the men's one, and you got excited about what was about to happen. It was the collegiate NCAA basketball championships. Then the same year, we go over to the women's event, and I kid you not, there's a picture of a swing set and slide, and little girls on the swing set and one going down the slide. And the commentator said, these girls grew up to be something their mother never imagined. It's like, what? Then we go to the actual production quality. And for the men's event, there were 7 cameras. And for the women's event, and by the way, they always called it the women's event, although you could tell from the athletes they were women. And that kind of coding, making it something different from the national championship. And for the women's events, guess what? There were 3 cameras. So you can't get the number of shots and the number, the angles and watch the players as well with 3 cameras as you can with 7. And also the number of statistics that were up on the board were significantly missing for the women's games, and they're in great proportion for the men's games. I've long believed that the difference in women's and men's publicity in the media is based on betting, because much of sports coverage had to do with betting. And in fact, the first sports page was all about the horses out of Philadelphia. So the tradition of sports information and betting goes back a very long way. And because there's not enough information about women to even bet on, and I'm not, by the way, I'm not supporting betting, it's just the fact of how the publicity is skewed. Until there's enough information about women and the games, there won't be betting, which is okay with me, but that makes a difference in how newspapers wish to use their space, because if there's no great demand for a lot of information about the athletes, they don't follow through with putting it in. So again, we need to think critically about the language that is used around women's sports and around women in general. For me, I've been taught that the word equity is the word to use as you're trying to get to the goal of equality, but I detest that word because it's less than being equal. So I would use the word equality, not equity, for that reason. I understand that equity is how to help you get to equality, but the goal of equality has to be maintained. I don't want to talk too long because I hope there'll be questions that I can answer, because I have more fun doing that than just gabbering, because I don't know what you want to know until I stop and listen to you. So with that, I will stop and listen.
Brilliant, Anita, that was wonderful. And with that in mind, your preference for conversation, I think this is probably the first conference I've been at that we've actually come in advance of time. I think that might possibly have something to do with women being the speakers. And I suggest what we do for the panel session now, and I think I've got the go-ahead from the principal conference organisers. We have got a few questions come in, which we definitely will use, but what I'd like all the panelists to do is to show themselves. So let your cameras work. So that's Virginia, Mariam, Tanny, Sally and Anita, and so that we can have a bit of a conversation. I will throw in some of the questions that come in, but it would be great for you to also question each other a bit, I think, because you've all contributed something quite different, very powerful. So I can't see I can see Anita, I can't see any of the rest of you. So if we could, with the technology, show the rest of the panel, that would be brilliant.
If you go to gallery.
Yeah. Richard, I'm still here if you can hear me, but my video seems to have dropped off, so I'm trying to get it back on. But I think, can you still hear me? It's Sally.
Yeah, we can hear you, Sally.
Okay.
We need Richard to release your videos. And you might want to stop sharing the screen, actually, Richard, as well, because that would mean we would see you all. But I think if we can hear you all, we'll let Richard get on with the technology, and I think we should probably kick off. So we've had a couple of questions come in. I think we'll start with them, but I really want to also get you. I don't know if you're going to argue with each other. You might be able to have an argument about equity, equality, but definitely get you talking to each other. The first question that came in that I saw was from Yvette, and I'm aware of Yvette's work. Women of colour who set up a surf club, I think down the southwest of England, typically, strangely really, as someone who always used to body surf as a kid, typically male sport, but really successful club. Not very many women of colour taking part. And what would be advice as to how do you bring people in who aren't seeing themselves to be those first pioneers? Anyone chip in? First in will probably be visible. Or I will have to ask somebody, Anita. I mean, when you've got the situation which has been so traditionally, in the case of surfing, white and male, you know, how do you think, what are some of the steps you think you could overcome to kind of widen that?
Oh, first you have to be intentional about what you want to do. If you really want to have girls of different skin colors there, you have to look for them and encourage them. I mean, one of the barriers to surf club and other sports is learning how to swim and being able to do that. So for being a surfer, you have to know how to swim, just as you have to know how to swim to be a rower. So you have to figure out how to do that. The surfing club, figure that out and be intentional, and don't go after just one girl. You know, well, it depends what the age group is. So if they're high schoolers, you need to go after 2 who are friends to keep them coming back. I mean, just the normal things that you have to do with the teenagers who are, you know, their goal is to fit in completely, which is not necessarily what being a surfer would be.
No, that's very wise, I think, and I hope that is helpful. I think one of the things coming into the sports world, having previously been in the environment world, was the statistics in the UK about the percentage of people leaving school who could swim or who couldn't, and the economic inequality that revealed to me was really horrific. That something like, you know, 85% of privileged kids leaving school could swim 25 meters easily, and like 45% of less privileged kids. So that is a bit of a precursor, isn't it, for some of these sports like rowing and surfing. But I personally feel, and I think some of the stats on the swimming outdoors showing there's a particular liberation in that type of sport. Now we've had a question in to Sally about this sort of shocking disparity in the number of coaches who are female to male. And the question, Sally, we want a definitive answer to this, is when will female coaches make up significantly more than, when will female coaches make up 50% of Team GB coaches at the Olympic Games?
God, that's a big question. We're so far off that at the moment. I think that what we need to do is to really showcase where there are women being successful. There's so much in the line about not being able to be what you can't see. And I think that we've had some hugely successful women in coaching roles across various sports. And I feel like we just need to showcase them more. I think part of the challenge historically has been, and the experience that I've had from the sport I was in, is that quite often we saw men breaking into the sort of performance roles, an age band where quite often women were having children. And so it made it easy to use that as an excuse for women then not getting into those roles. Oh, well, you know, women are you know, it's the time when they're having children. And I think it's made it too easy. And I think that what we're seeing is the way that women are able to actually manage being parents and having careers actually is something that just doesn't seem to have translated as well into the sports coaching world as it has into other industries. So I think we need to do more showcasing of the women that have done it and have done it well. We need to celebrate that more. And I think the more that we see, the more it will encourage other women to step into that space.
That's great. And Sally, can I just follow up quickly and say, how much do you feel it's also to do with the deeper cultural issue of women not prioritising themselves, always putting themselves at the bottom of the pecking order, prioritising their kids, their other halves, their parents, and not thinking they have permission, frankly, to do something that is that fulfilling?
I think it's partly that, and I think attached to that is that certainly to be an international coach, you will spend a vast amount of your time away from home. The coaches that worked in the international hockey program would spend in some years up to 200 days away from home, 200 nights, bed nights away from home. And I think there's definitely something women feeling like that they, should they do that, or particularly if they've got a family. So that ties into your point about them putting themselves at the bottom. But the other thing that I would add into that is that it's well said, isn't it, about women not applying for jobs unless they think they meet 100% of the criteria. And one of the things about elite sport, and it's one of the things that I know isn't always popular amongst all of my elite sport colleagues, is that I think that one of the mistakes that we've made in elite sport over time is we've created a mystery around elite sport, that if you've not worked in elite sport, you can't possibly understand it, you can't possibly grasp it. And it's a bit like being, I guess, the medical industry and the legal industry. They've almost create their own language that makes it quite exclusive. And I think in performance sport, we've done a little bit of that we've tried to make it almost too exclusive. And so that then just exacerbates the fact that women who want to see that they match 100% of a job description applying for something, because already we're making an exclusive, you've got to be special. So we're making the barriers even harder. And I just think thinking about what Anita was saying about language is so important. And I think in performance sport, we just need to break that down a little bit generally. And I think that will be beneficial.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Any other panelists want to pick up on the coaching thing? I'm quite interested in having a conversation. I think you're all unmuted. The rest of the audience isn't, but that would be chaos because we can't see them. But any other panelists want to chip in on the coaching issue before we move on?
Sorry, it's Tanya. I think as well what we need to do is think differently about coaching courses. So a few years ago, I went to a coaching course for young athletes. It was being run by women for women. And bizarrely, seeing as it's for coaching young people, none of the women were allowed to bring their children along. There was no creche facility. We know that women have mostly, more care and responsibilities. So we spent a pile of time finding other young people to bring in from a club. So obviously you wouldn't want to be coaching your own child, but actually it's just not joining some of those things up. And I think, it's not enough to say, well, the door's open, we're there if people want to come. You might not know some of those opportunities. And I've, in some of the sports my daughter's done, who's now 18, the role of the dad is to coach and to timekeep and to do that. And the role of the women is to run the tea shop. And, so we tend to do it the other way around, just to start saying, you can do things in a different way. But unless governing bodies are really serious, but we talk a lot of good stuff, what do we do? and now's the time to actually, you know, let's think about those barriers, because just saying the door is open is just not enough, because those people don't see that the door's open.
I was also just thinking about how, like, you know, the whole conversation around prioritizing yourself, like practically that's still quite hard. Say if you're a mother who has children and you are looking after them and you don't have anyone to help out, like practically they can't prioritize themselves because that's their situation. So how do we just make it more suitable for them to, I don't know, like have their children with them, or, you know, things like that.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful addition to conversation. Can we move on a bit? There's a few questions coming in really about the fencing project, and you know what you feel. One of the questions is what you felt uniquely you drew from this combination of the poetry and the activity, the sort of the creativity in the words and the activity, and how transferable in a way that might be. Because I haven't seen much in the time I've been, which is a very short time, in sport that has so brilliantly combined those two things. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it does. And I think from an NGB's point of view, for us being involved in the project, the combination of bringing the creative world and the arts world together, although it shouldn't be unique, it is fairly unique. And I think for us, one of the challenges we face with that is being around funding and resources, and being able to help the industry understand the importance of how the two play into each other. And I think I said really early on, if you take one element out of the project, you lose what the project's about. And for fencing in particular, which does happen to be not only a very creative and expressionate sport, we know for our research tells us for females as well, it's one of the big draws into it. So it stood us in a really good position when we started the project that fencing worked really well. And I think Mariam can probably expand a little bit more around the creative side of it and the way that the creative element is brought into it, because when we first started, we did the kind of traditional, typical thing of we've got a fencing session and then we've got a creative session, and they'll just naturally come together, and they absolutely didn't. And it became two very standalone pieces of the project, and it's taken a huge amount of work and education within our sport and with the coaches that we work with to help them understand how the two go hand in hand, and how expressing yourself physically as well as creatively can make a really big difference. And I think it's taken a lot to get to that point, and there's a lot of work that's gone into educating the coaches and also ourselves, the national governing body, understanding the importance of that and the power that fencing can play beyond always looking from a performance point of view, but the bigger picture of what sport can do. I don't know if you've got anything else to add.
Mariam, yeah, have you got any reflections on that, or what else could be drawn across from that fencing project in terms of the particular ways you felt Muslim girls were engaging in it as well?
I think, do you know from the recent report that came around about women's experiences in lockdown, one of the things that came out was that it provides a space for human connection. And I think the art just like supplements that, and it emphasizes it, because when you're doing a creative workshop, you're also expressing yourself vocally. So it's not just through the body, but that expression through your voice, and also the understanding then created between a facilitator, a sports, whoever, the coach, and the girls is just even more. It's everything, all the barriers that you'd want to kind of understand, they'd then be saying in those sessions through those kind of creative workshops, because they'd be talking about the issues that they face without us kind of telling them what they should be saying or what we think that they're going to say. They kind of just open up and say it themselves.
Yeah, that is very powerful.
Yeah.
Carry on. Were you going to? I mean, Anita, you reflected on that video, which you'd obviously got up at crack of dawn in a different part of the States to where I said to watch. Did you have a particular reflection? Because you're clearly passionate about language.
Yeah, that I listened as carefully as I could to the language there, and I didn't find anything that made me worry from what I heard. And you know, sport and education go together. Again, in Los Angeles, when I was at the foundation, we used sport basically at the middle school in order to help the kids graduate from high school. And the important thing about middle school is the teachers were their teachers and other, their classroom teachers that we taught how to coach. So they had a relationship with an adult, which in a classroom of 40 is really hard to do. And that also tied them closer to the school. But we have a different system where we have sports as a part of education.
Yes, which seems quite basic, but not something we've really achieved over here. That's really, I'm just going to, anyone else on the panel who wants to chip in on that issue, do jump in. I was going to switch us towards the issue that Tanny raised about duty of care and the lack of protection for 16 to 18-year-olds from romantic relationships, so to say, it's a rather charming way of putting it, with their coaches. And whether you've got a campaign we should all be joining behind Tanny on that, or what you think the next steps are, because something again, being new to the area, I was pretty shocked to discover was the case. I'd have just assumed that the same rules applied.
I mean, you'd think so, wouldn't you? And I think this is some of the sort of the myth that sort of is around sport. And elite sport's amazing and it empowers and encourages, but we sell the gold medalist, the Olympian Paralympian idea to young people, and people buy into it. And we've seen with historical sexual abuse in male football and other things that have been around that we all know about. And you've got to be careful between what's rumour and what's proven. But we shouldn't be shocked by some of these things anymore. One of my frustrations around positions of trust is being told, well, a coach doesn't have a relationship with a young athlete. It's just like a taxi driver. This one or potentially small group of people have ultimate control over someone's route into elite sport, or within a club, or wherever it is. So for me, it's really important we tackle this head on and we stop sort of pretending it doesn't exist. And for me, I we call it a relationship. I was dealing with a case a while ago, and the response back to me was, "She's legal. What do you want us to do?" No, not acceptable. Absolutely. And I won't say any more because it's not right to. So, my whole piece of work on duty of care, I don't think any of the recommendations were radical, but actually what probably did surprise me is the amount of blocking that went on and really rushing in to say, oh, we don't need, sport is different. And in many ways, sport is not. There are people who need boundaries set around them. And we have to, if you've worked in sport, so the reason I didn't write a long explanation of why I came to the recommendations, partly it would have been with a legal team for a long time, but also if you know sport, you know why each one of those recommendations are there. And so we have to stop pretending that sport is different. It is brilliant, but it also comes with a dark side. And, I'm not saying, elite sport, what makes people good is you're on a knife edge. But we shouldn't be leaving young people or anyone, coming out of the system the other side broken. And I think we just have to face up to it and do something.
Yeah. And when you say you were surprised by the amount of blocking that came out when you came up with those recommendations, well, you were sort of surprised by that. What would you say? I mean, it may be naive to ask, but the motivations behind the blocking. Is it the sort of instinctive defence of the status quo? Is it because people don't want to put coaches off getting involved and introduce more bureaucracy? They must be being blocked by people who aren't actually seeking that sort of relation. There must be something more to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not from, certainly not my experience of people who want to have an unhealthy abuse of power over young people. That's not. I think it comes back to sport can't be challenged. We can't say anything. When some athletes have spoken out, I mean, this is going back the whole of my career. It gets easily spun that they're bitter and twisted. What they are actually is out of contract. And we need to just fess up to that and understand if you've experienced lots of challenges, and it's difficult because where does tough coaching go into abuse? There's a lot of nuances in this. But I think, one of the challenges is that we don't think about people as individuals. One of the most shocking things that happened when I was doing it was I spoke to a 14-year-old who said to me, when the sport asks for loyalty, they need compliance. And the reality is, there's loads of people. The people who came to me were the ones who had issues. I had people who came to me who had really good experiences, stuff like that, and that's great. And there's loads of good stuff happening, but there's not a yin and yang. And so, the final thing I'm going to say is that it is not acceptable when we are talking about a safeguarding issue to ever, ever, ever say that coach has won a number of medals. That does not balance it out. Never.
Can I build on what Tanya said? I totally agree with what you just said, Tanya, about
Sally, try
the amount of time.
Sally, try your video again in case it has been released, because it'd be lovely to see you. Can you unclick it? Can you? Yeah. Okay. Doesn't matter. We'll see your name. Keep going.
There she is.
Hooray! Oh no, that's Anita. That's nice. Sally, try again. Oh, now I feel terrible. Have you muted now, Sally? Don't mute.
I can see Sally.
But I don't think we can hear her. Is that right?
She's not talking.
Well, Sally, if you can sort out your video and microphone, I probably triggered it. We go back to your views on the issue, because we really want to hear your views on the issue. Anyone else on the panel have a view on this duty of care issue? Yeah, Anita.
Yeah, there are predators around everywhere, and we have to be vigilant. Indeed, again, my experience, especially with kids, was we told coaches you cannot be alone with one athlete unless it's your own child, period. You just can't, because it's not safe for you or for the athlete. And so we insisted on that. But there are predators everywhere, and we need to protect our athletes, because I had one year when I was coaching that scared me to death. I coached at Princeton, and I had far too much power. And I said, this is just wrong. The amount of power that I had over the athletes, and the athletes, if I told them to jump off a cliff that would make them better, they would have done it. That's way too much power. And that's the way coaches are often revered, for reasons only because they're the coach. And everybody has to, make sure the coach doesn't hate them because they want to be able to play. But please, please, we got to get rid of the predators.
Sally.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. Yeah.
Excellent. Sorry. So I don't know what was happening there. I agree with what Tanny just said about the good coaches bit, and that somebody can behave inappropriately and still be described as a good coach. I remember when I was at hockey, a guy being described as, oh yeah, he's a bit of a bully, but he's such a great coach. He's technically brilliant. And I'm like, then that doesn't make him a good coach. Sorry, that doesn't. You can't be a good coach and be a bully. That those two words should not fit in the same sentence. And I feel really strongly that what we should be doing in the elite sports space is encouraging an environment where athletes enjoy the journey. They enjoy the journey of being on an elite sport program. Our job as administrators, as coaches, as people who sit around these elite programs, our job is to wrap the best possible environment and program round athletes to give them the best chance of achieving their ambitions and dreams. That's what we are here to do. And I don't believe that having a positive journey and having duty of care is in conflict with winning medals. I absolutely believe that you can do both. And I think really importantly, one of the things that we need to do is we have to remember that whilst there are these really terrible examples and hideous stories, the vast majority of people involved in elite sport in the UK, I truly believe, are doing the right thing and doing a good job. And what we have got to do in the narrative is we have got to not just talk about those that are doing a bad job and label everyone with that same brush, because what that does is it silences the good people. And we need the good people to join with us to stamp out any bad people. As Anita says, there are predators all over our society. Sport is going to get its fair share of them. And what we've got to do is we've got to really, really free up the voices of all of the good people, of which there are far more good than there are bad. We've got to free up those voices to join together and make it known to these people that they are not welcome in our industry.
That's really powerful, Sally, and it's also about the expectation that we put on each other to challenge each other, and peer-to-peer challenge, and how that isn't culturally imbued as yet. It's almost as if the system should sort them out. They look a bit weird and nasty, but I won't challenge them myself. We need to empower people to do that, presumably is part of what you're saying, and we do need to hear that voice. I don't know who saw The Guardian a few days ago. I was driven to a tweet about it, but it had 2 huge articles about both the abuse of young female gymnasts and about the exclusion and racism that a black woman working in Formula One had suffered. And that was 2 huge pages. And then it had 15, I think, I could be exaggerating, might have only been 11 pages of sport, all male, all men, literally not a single woman. Not that surprising in the British papers, visible. So the only coverage of the sport was this incredibly negative, miserable coverage. Absolutely important that it's there, but it was news, you know, and nothing positive. So that balance between really strong challenge and also giving visibility to the great people within is quite interesting. This might be too difficult to answer, Tanny, but I'm conscious that during the Me Too protests, a lot of the nice men, i.e. non-sort of lechy men who I knew, were really shocked, genuinely shocked, that it was really normal for us to have had hands all over our legs at dinners and, you know, this, that, the other. Oh my God, you know, did this ever happen to you? And just look at them go, well, of course it did. I mean, you know, and it was like, well, why didn't, and then they realized, of course, we wouldn't talk to them about it because you'd go to the person who understood, and so we'd talk to each other. And it was a best kept secret amongst women that this was just run of the mill, and you know, we had to find ways to bat it off. And I'm conscious that a lot of listening men really changed their understanding of what it was like to live as a woman in society. And I think as a listening white woman, some of the reading I've done around Black Lives Matter has made me feel a bit like that on a couple of counts, that, you know, I'd liked to consider myself, you know, that I, you know, fully into this person, but I hadn't heard the voices of Black and Asian women, and say even people I work with and know well, in the same way that now they're coming through, and that for me is just a really massive step forward, even if it's only in a certain small section of society that attitudes have been changed by that. You know what I'm going to ask, and it's having spent yesterday talking to Barry Horn at the Activity Alliance. Could we ever imagine a time where some of the voices of people, of disabled people, are coming through more powerfully to challenge the kind of the listening people, the listening able-bodied people, I suppose, to understand better? You know, some of your anecdotes just sort of hit you in the face when you're, I'm trying to do a bit of body language for the sake of the conference, when you're listening to them, you know, because you expect you to have had some pretty crap experiences, but some of the way you talk about them are like, can you think, is it just too diverse, really, the issues you're dealing with in that sense? I don't know.
I think we can all do with sort of understanding more about different people's experiences. I absolutely, so I'm treated 3 ways. I'm treated one way as a Paralympian, which is generally really nice. As a politician, people either like me or hate me. And then as a disabled woman, I experience my most discrimination. And if I complained every time I experienced discrimination as a disabled woman, I would be complaining every day, because people are like, you can't get on the train, you can't do that. You should go on the tube when it's not busy because people have jobs to go to. Yeah, I'm going to mine in the House of Lords. So it's the low level stuff, the microaggression that's hard to deal with. The big stuff is easier in some ways because there's a complaints process. But even then, you know, you kind of just, you get, you know, let's go, oh, it'll never happen again. Really? What, you're never going to leave me on a train ever again? I know, you know, I started tweeting about trains because I was tired of being left on. And actually there's 2 bits of it. The train companies react because they see it, but also one of the biggest changes was being that voice. So for non-disabled people to see it. So now I get people tweeting saying, I've seen a wheelchair user stuck on a train. I held the doors open and refused to let the train go. Not ideal, but it's kind of a step. So yeah, the stories matter, but you know what, I've not even told you some of the really horrible stuff that's happened to me either in sport or out of sport, because actually I don't particularly want to say some of those things. So if you found anything I've said shocking today, that's tip of the iceberg. And so I do see a point where more voices, but if you take some, there's a Netflix film coming out end of August, which is about Paralympics. It's amazing, watch it. But we have something in disability called cripping up in film. And it's a bit of a joke, but if you're a non-disabled actor and you play a disabled person, good chance you'll get an Oscar. Daniel Day-Lewis, I mean, there's lots, you know. And so me and a friend, within 3 mails, identified every disabled person that we'd seen on TV in the last 10 years. Because it's totally acceptable to crip up. Totally acceptable. There's films out right now. So, you know what? Let's just stop doing things like that. You know, but anyway, sorry. But it's like, unless we call it out, and you know what? A lot of people don't have the energy to do it. If you're surviving, you're less likely to be in work as a disabled person. You're less likely to have an education. You're more likely to be in low paid work. You add on any of the other protected characteristics, and it adds another, you know, it's like top trumps, you know, you more and more and more. And if you're on a part-time contract, you can't argue about any of this stuff. So there's actually, the really sad thing, there's not many disabled people who can actually just stand up and say that, because it's not going to affect my career, you know. But there's so many people who can't say a word because they know just I think Anita was talking about language. All the language they use around women are a bit flighty, they're difficult, but all that gets used in disabled people, and before you know it, you're out, and you know you have no chance coming back in. So people, women, lots of people, you tolerate a level of behaviour because you think that's what you're meant to do.
Yeah, I've heard it described as the sort of tightrope between being the over-emotional, hysterical woman and being the scary woman, and the tightrope being a nanometer wide to walk. And when you're then adding a layer of disabled or race layer, you know, that tightrope becomes a sort of micro nanometer, whatever it is. And yet we shouldn't be constrained by that. Are there any other thoughts from the panel on this? In a way, the challenge of, you know, lifting the campaign from 30% to 50% of women on boards. We're looking at, you know, maybe 20% targets in the UK for representation from Black and Asian communities on boards. How does that leave disabled people representation on board? You know, and I know there's the word intersectionality. I'm not sure I like it, but really what we want is every walk of life to be reflected as a society it's serving, don't we? And yet that requires every leader to have enough understanding and vision of the world to recognize that, which is something which we know most of them don't have. So any reflections from anyone else on the panel on these issues at all? Have we lost someone? Ah, go on, Anita. I think we might have lost Mariam. I don't know. Or maybe I just can't see her. Oh, you're there. Good. I've had the wrong thing on.
Back. Okay. No, I just wanted to speak for a moment about skin color. Again, the words we use catch us up. I started by saying we are one race, the human race. So how can you say the other race? There's only one race. It's about, again, we're all the same, and yet we're each unique. So if you're talking about skin color, you should say that, not say race, because we are one race.
Okay.
And then if we can stop sectioning off people because of the color of their skin, we'll be much more healthy. And I hope we can get there before I'm gone from this mortal coil.
Language is really important, and I'm hoping to improve mine if I've used the wrong language. So thank you for that, Anita. If there was one thing that I'm going to go to each of you that you feel that hosting this international working group on women in sport would bring to the UK, you know, would bring for sport by hosting it in the UK, what might that be? Or hosting it in your home nation, you know, what do you think it could bring? What would you like to feel if we hosted it successfully would be the lasting legacy of having done that, the big issue that was raised? And because Lisa suggested I ask that question, I wonder if I should ask her first while the rest of you are thinking. You'd have to unmute though, Lisa. There we go.
Hi, Steph. Thank you. I am still here and thoroughly enjoying the panel discussions. For me, I want a seamless, and I use the word, a seamless pathway to enable anyone that has that desire to come into a leadership position in the UK and overseas globally, to know the steps they have to take. But more importantly, not just knowing the steps they have to take, they have one or two people alongside them, hopefully one male, one female, or it doesn't really matter about genders, but hopefully a male ally and a female networker that can hold their hands on that journey, because you will slip. I've slipped lots. Many a time in international meetings, I've slipped for a whole host of different reasons, because you're the only woman, as we know, in that arena. So for me, I want a really clear pathway that is supported by network and coach, and also as a career progression. So a professional pathway that is supported. And I think if we can get that, people will progress more quickly. They'll be more confident. There'll be more role models. And as everybody said, if you can see it, you can dream it, you can believe it, and believe you me, you will achieve it. So for me, that's the outtake that's driving me in terms of hosting and putting all the work in for the next 5 years in terms of IWG.
Thanks, Lisa. Can I go to you, Mariam, because we've not heard from you for a while. Have you got any reflections on what hosting this major international conference could do?
Yeah, I just think understanding more like I guess what the different barriers are for different women, so that there is more of a universal understanding without our like projecting what we think universal is, but actually if we have a great understanding from different people of what barriers are, then it's getting closer and closer to real universal understandings.
No, I think that's been very powerful in what you said already. I am looking at a bit of body language here. Virginia's put a mute on, so I don't ask her next. Oh no, okay, it's off, okay, go on then.
Apologies, I've just had a builder outside, so that's why I've been muted for most of it. I think I'd echo actually what Lisa said around the pathway. I was fortunate enough in 2015 to be part of the Women's Sport Leadership Academy that Liz referenced earlier, and as a woman working within sport, it's been my entire career so far. It was probably the most moving and inspirational and almost, as far as I'd say, life-changing experience I had on that week. And it was partly due to the fact that I was exposed to women from outside what I'd call the kind of traditional network that I would engage within sport within this country, but being completely inspired and by women from all across the world, dealing with the challenges that they deal within as women within their own countries, and you know, I think I kind of said we sometimes can complain a little bit that we haven't got enough money to buy new equipment, or we haven't got enough footballs or enough pieces of fencing kit, yet you're dealing with women who are running incredibly powerful projects with, you know, a football that's 20 years old and there's one ball between 100 kids, and they're trying to tackle some really quite just heartbreaking projects, really. And I think that the reason I say that, I came through that period of time with the Women's Sport Leadership Academy, and there's a small handful of women that I've kept in touch with purely because they inspire me, they build my confidence. But I would love to think that I think there was 4 of us from this country on that cohort, and deliberately I think the numbers are fairly low, because part of it is the experience of being with women from all over the world. But every woman should be able to have an opportunity to be part of WSLR. Every woman should have the chance who wants to progress and wants to do the best they can in their career. And that's not necessarily about always going up the food chain, but be the best they can be. And I would love to think in an ideal world that every woman would have the opportunity to experience what I experienced, and probably how a lot of the other women feel that did that. Well,
that was brilliant. Thank you, Virginia. And that's given a little bit of space to Tanny and Anita to reflect on their answer.
Thank you. It's probably not one thing. I think what Lisa said is really important in terms of knowing that pathway. I had huge numbers of people who helped me in different ways, who gave me board experience as a young athlete and different things like that. There's not a career path. to the stuff I did as a Paralympian or the stuff that I do now. So even just a bit of understanding, if that's good. From a personal point of view, what I would love, and I need to make this really clear, this absolutely didn't happen with this event, and you know, I've been involved from the beginning, but when the night before an event that's talking about diversity and inclusion suddenly realises we haven't got a visible disabled person, we'll invite Tanny. You know what? I'm over that. Totally over it. Not doing.
But you will come. But you will still come.
Oh no, no. I've been really clear. Sport and Rec Alliance. I've known Lisa for a really long time. You know, she knows where I'm coming with it. You know, this absolutely. But you know what? Inviting any Paralympian, or just inviting one or two disabled people that you know. That's not taken. I went to something last year, and it literally I was invited the night before, and I looked around the room. Was talking about D&I, and it's like, I'm the only visible disabled person here. That was the turning point for me. Not happening.
Okay, well, that's helpful and points towards Lisa as making sure as well that we probably involve the Activity Alliance and Sport Equals to make sure we don't fall into any, I need to say heffalump holes, but we won't understand that. Great, okay, thank you. And Anita, I know you might be thinking, I don't think there's a competing US bid, so I think we're all right, we're on safe territory. What would you feel would be important to get out of the next conference?
Yeah, I think it's getting a sense of where we are in the world, because in some parts things have advanced very well, in other parts not. And I'm so sorry that the current IOC president does not like conferences, because I thought the IOC conferences on women's sport was able to do a lot every 4 years. There's enough time to accomplish something. Anyhow, so this would be wonderful to have, to bring the women and the people who care about women's sport together.
Great, okay. I'm going to start wrapping up now, I think, because we've just had the most brilliant conference, and we want to bring us in for 3, or having been ahead of time, that would be a tragedy. As I said earlier, we're screen sharing again. I spent the first 7 years of my career campaigning on environmental issues. You know, 30 years ago, we were trying to flag up that climate change was a little bit of an issue, the future of humanity and the rest of the species on this planet. In the last few years, there's been some recognition of that. When people started campaigning for education for all, you know, it took hundreds of years in this country alone to achieve anything on that. Changing the culture is a long-term game, and I think some of the speakers today have emphasized that this is no exception. The reality is we are determined, and I think it is really, really important we retain impatience. And I think the younger generation encourage the older ones of us to continue to be impatient, because you can be worn down. We need to talk straight. We must avoid being grateful for crumbs. I think Tanny said something along those lines. It doesn't mean we are disrespectful or rude, but we just need to be consistently assertive and consistently remember we're right. Keep reminding ourselves we are not doing this for us, we're doing this for future generations, for what is right. And that, you know, I feel increasingly that outside the sport world, in the UK, which is the country I'm most familiar with, there isn't a great understanding, particularly in those who actually want to change society for the better, that sport can change the lives of girls and women, and that therefore can change society. And we need to feel confident that and keep our campaigning up for that. And I do think that this conference will be critical to that. Today has been really important in feeding into the bid that's going to be put in to host the conference. There will be some questions going around straight afterwards, so if you could respond to them, that will be great. There's a survey about the conference itself as well going around, and that second phase of research, your answers to that will really help inform the bid. So thank you very much, everyone, for taking part today, and particularly the speakers all day, but particularly those this afternoon that I've frankly had the honour to sort of chair. So unless there's anything else, I think, Lisa, we are wrapping up at this point. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you all, and thank you, Steph. We'll be in touch.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you guys. All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye bye.